Let's talk about putting players on rails. In the tabletop space, this means that the GM has a story they want to tell, a book they wrote, or something similar. And basically, the players are there to act out their script rather than having the freedom that you normally have in a tabletop game. This is normally considered to be pretty bad practice. It's normally considered to be bad GMing. In the computer game space, we have a similar problem. Now, computer games are all pre-scripted in their own way. They have to be coded after all. So the definition's a little bit different for me. In the computer game space, I say that a game is on rails if everyone who plays it has the same experience. If you have 18 players and they all have the exact same experience when they play the game is on rails. An example of this would be Cookie Clicker. You click cookies. You buy upgrades so you can click cookies in different ways. Everybody who plays Cookie Clicker, except for very, very rare edge cases, has the same experience. And if you play Cookie Clicker twice, then you're going to have the same experience twice. So this is a game that is on rails because there is no choice that you can make. There's no way for you to express yourself within Cookie Clicker that Cookie Clicker will accept. You can choose to play it slower or faster. You can choose to try and buy the upgrades out of order, but that won't change anything about the game. It just changes how fast things go by. A counterexample of that would be a JRPG. A JRPG has a plotline that's basically on rails. I mean, you've got specific people wandering around in the world doing specific things at the specific times, acting out this specific script that someone wrote. But the game itself is not on rails because there is space to express yourself. You have favorite characters, you have different builds of character, you grind different amounts at different times to get different gear. So everybody has their own experience in a JRPG, and they connect to the content of a JRPG in different ways. So if we were to think about how on rails something is as an axis, a spectrum, normally we would try and think about, say, Cookie Clicker is down here and the JRPG is over here and Skyrim is over there somewhere. But that's not true, is it? The JRPG is over here when it comes to plot, and it's over here when it comes to play, right? You have parts of the game that are on rails and parts of the game that aren't. And if it's a Western RPG, maybe the plot won't be on rails. It's one of those things where which parts of the game you choose to put on rails and which parts you allow the player to express themselves on make up a large portion of what makes your game interesting to play. Now, personally, I think that the more stuff is on rails, the less interesting a game is, especially for repeat plays. But there are reasons why you might want to put things on rails. And that reason would be it's cheaper and it's more controllable, right? So if you have everything on rails, then everybody has the same experience every single time they play, which means you can polish that one experience. You don't have to make a bunch of branching content. You don't have to worry about, changing it after the fact or taking into account anything else the player has done. If it's on rails, you can make one exact experience to your exact specifications, which is an excellent way to efficiently spend your money. But when your entire game is like that, it really makes the player feel a little bit straitjackety. And maybe that's just me. Obviously, I'm kind of imposing my own beliefs here. But if you look at the games that people keep coming back to, most of them allow for a significant amount of player expression. Skyrim isn't a good game, but it's an extremely expressive game. And so people can play it for 1,000 hours. You can play Space Engineers for 1,000 hours. You can play whatever MOBA is popular right now for 1,000 hours because the players have the ability to express themselves and play in a way that connects them to the content of a game in their own specific way. Every player connects to the game in a way that's different than every other player. They all have their own preferences, their own approaches, their own play styles, and they can change them day to day. Let's give an example of a little bit of an unusual, not a failure exactly, but a situation where something is on rails even though it doesn't look like it. And the reason that this matters is because if it's actually on rails, even if it doesn't look like it's on rails, you're not going to have a lot of replay value and you're not going to have a lot of diversity between different players. So in this example, we'll talk about Loop Hero. Loop Hero is a recent game. I'm going to do some very minor spoilers and some review here. It's a very recent game that came out, and this got very positive reviews. Everybody loves it. I don't, because it involves cards. Cards are awful. I hate them. But with that in mind, let's also talk about one of the places where Loop Hero falls apart, and that is player expressiveness, allowing the player to connect to the world of Loop Hero, the game of Loop Hero, in their own specific way. So in this game, you play as a character that runs around on this loop, and you draw cards to place them on the world. So it's like, oh, here's the mountain card, here's a river card, here, but there's no rivers, here's a forest card, whatever, right? Here's a vampires card. Put them on the world. Build your world however you want. And you would think that this would be expressive, right? You're getting the player to build whatever they want to build. But the problem is that there is a best way to do it. And that means that there are very rarely any situations where the player chooses to express themselves or to connect to the world in any sort of unique way. It's always just a matter of whether the player knows the best way to put it together or not. Now, obviously, you can sort of tweak the deck that you're building. So, before you start the loop, you can choose which cards show up in the deck and which cards don't. And you might think that that's a space where the player would be able to express themselves. But that's not true, because the game is balanced such that you need the resources from every card. So if you decide to not bring a card with you, then you're just going to have to go again, bringing the card next time in order to get the resources that you need. Similarly, you go back to camp, and you can build your camp in any place you like. Like, you can put the buildings in any place you want, but just like a mobile game, it doesn't matter where you put your stuff, and you're going to be putting the exact specific things in the exact specific order. It's just this, oh, you want to build this building, and then you want to build this building, and then, the branches out from here again, and you're going to be building all of these buildings in a very specific order due to the resources that they require. Where they go doesn't really matter. You can't really change which ones you want to build in which order. You can, but it would be worthless to change that order around. You could build more than one farm, but there's never a reason to. So every time that it feels like the player is going to have the ability to express themselves or to connect to the game world in their own specific way, it turns out that it's all on rails. There's always a way to play the game correctly. And then if you don't do that, you just have to do it correctly. It's like there's no not doing it correctly. There's doing it correctly or not moving. This is a common problem with very, very strictly balanced games where it's clear that the devs have this ideal path in their mind, and they're like, oh, the player's going to feel so clever when they figure this out. That might be true, but it does mean that there is exactly one path through the game. And it means that the player can only connect to the game in one way. Now, Loop Hero is very popular. I don't know how popular it is. It's very well respected. It's gotten mostly positive reviews, and the people who play it like it. But it's interesting to see these places where they have given you the illusion of expressiveness and then taken it away by aggressively balancing it. Now, this isn't bad. It's not like I'm saying that you shouldn't do this, but there is a different sort of feeling when you actually allow the player to connect to your game in a way that suits them, that is unique to them. An example of that would be in a JRPG, right? Where you get to build your party however you want. The characters can be a variety of different class builds, right? Now, the secret to that is that there is an optimal class build, but nobody cares. The enforcement of the path forward is very loose. So instead of being this really, really tight grid that never changes, it's kind of this wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey thing. And as long as you're kind of good enough, you'll be able to move through the game. This means that you're allowed to express yourself by creating whatever character builds you want, and you'll be gently nudged back towards a pretty good performance by fitness tests like, oh, did you build a party entirely out of white mages? Well, then guess what? You're probably going to have a hard time with it, but you're going to have some time to get back on track, right? It's not going to just kill you for doing it wrong. And, you can get back on track any way you want. It's going to be part of your personal story. It's going to be something that you did and pushed through for a while and then changed routes, but those people still have that magician in their backstory, and it's going to be your own way of connecting to this world. It doesn't get reset. It doesn't get cleared away. It doesn't get paused until you do it right. It's something where your choices work within the game world, but they don't have to be the optimal choices. Enforcing optimization is often a really weak approach. Let me give you an example from a completely different genre. You're making ships. You're playing Stormworks. Now, Stormworks has a pretty high barrier to entry. It's a little bit difficult to get started. But one of the things about Stormworks that's interesting is that you don't have to do things ideally. You can do things pretty loosey-goosey. Because the engines are a little bit overpowered and things are, a little bit easier than they would be in reality. But the thing about it is that there is no pinhole that you're looking for. It's not like you must do at least this well to play the game. No, it's a thing where you're allowed to do as well as you can. And this means that you can do way, way better than the devs ever thought you could. You can optimize things far past where the devs conceived of, because it's an open set of parameters. You're allowed to do whatever you can. And if you know those parameters and you find a little gap in them that the devs didn't expect, you can push it way further than they expected. And you can find entire new realms of play. But on the other hand, if you're playing something like Loop Hero, well, you need exactly these 5 resources, which are provided by exactly these 5 cards, which are provided by exactly this adventure. And it's a very specific slot you're aiming for. It's like playing basketball, right? You got to hit that hoop. Everybody's aiming for the hoop. There's no better hoop. There is no magic play style that doesn't involve the hoop. Because you've defined the hoop. That's the only thing in the game that can matter. That's the only place that everybody's going to focus on. Whereas if it's a more open-ended game that doesn't have a hoop, the players can play a lot more freely, and they can rise as high as they can. Different players are going to go different lengths in different directions, but everybody's going to be able to push it. And that's what we talk about when we're talking about something like a JRPG expression, right? You got the party, and you're building your own party, and some players are going to build parties that are absolute beasts and can waltz through the game, and others are going to have a harder time. They're going to struggle, whether that's because they're not as good at building them, because they don't care as much, or because they're, young, who knows. But whatever the case may be, those people can make up for that by simply taking things a little slower. There is no specific ideal target. If you don't perform super well, that just means you're going to move a little slower. And if you perform super well, you can get through the whole game in 2 hours. The devs probably never thought you could. But because it's open-ended, you can. This sort of situation is a little bit tough to design for, as you might understand. Being on rails is nice because everything is just like on a rail. You can just plan everything out. But how can you plan out something like no hoops? How can you plan out not having hoops? What sort of nonsense is that? Well, it's generally pretty easy to come around to it once you start to slot it into your head a little bit, once you start to understand exactly what it means. And in this case, the easiest thing to do as an example, imagine if you have to rate the player on everything they do, but there is no passing grade. It's just a grade that goes up. So if I were to try and move through this part of the game with these characters that I built and they're not very good, then I would get a low grade. And if I build super cool characters with like magic shields and swords and stuff, and I just do it absolutely perfectly so that they all synergize perfectly, I get a very high grade. And maybe someone else will get an even higher grade. But the thing is that that grade is not pass-fail. So someone that does it poorly still gets to play the game through, still gets to enjoy themselves. They might have to take a little bit longer, but there's no penalty. It's just that they get to exist for longer in this game world. And if you consider that a penalty, build your game world so that it's not a penalty to stay inside of it. Now, the reason that this is so powerful is not just because those numbers go up, but because those numbers can go down. I can do my all magician run. I can just have party members that just cast magic and have staves and don't have any swords or armor at all. I can go through the entire game with just one person in my party. I can do all sorts of self-inflicted challenges. And as long as I understand those numbers, I can aim to get a mediocre number, and that will be a spectacular number for me. I have managed to connect to the game in a way the devs didn't expect, but they allowed for. Now, that's just one approach. I just want to make it super clear that it's not necessarily bad to lock everybody into your favorite rail, but if you want people to have their own experiences and to come back to your game and to replay your game, you're going to need to let them connect to your game in their own way. Yeah. That's it.